Attila the Hun. After spending his life causing fear in emperors, raiding cities, and earning the name Scourge of God, you'd expect his end to include a big fight, a bold assassination, or at least something that matches the reputation of one of the most feared men ever. Nah, not for Attila the Hun. First, a smidge of backstory. Attila was born in 406 CE and he grew up with the Huns, a group that moved around a lot. They were famous for their great riding skills, scary attacks, and a mindset of taking what they wanted. When he became the leader of the Huns, he took whatever he wanted and left a trail of destruction and chaos. He didn't just take over cities, he controlled whole empires. Attila couldn't be stopped, and the dude knew it. By 453 CE, he was at the height of his power. The Huns were in charge of Europe, and Attila thought it was time to party. His definition of a good time? Yet another wedding. Did I mention he had collected quite a few wives? I guess adding one more wouldn't hurt. This time, his wife was a young lady named Ildiko. It's unclear if she was excited about marrying Attila, but the wedding took place, and the night turned out quite differently than anyone thought. After a day of eating and drinking a lot, he went to his room with Ildiko. The following morning, his helpers found his dead body. Now, what was the actual cause of death? There have been a few theories thrown around. One common story is that Attila drank a lot, had a big nosebleed while sleeping, choked on his blood, and passed away. Yep, the Scourge of God died choking on his own blood. Others suggest it may have been an assassination, with Ildiko possibly involved. Did she make him sick or kill him? We might not find out for certain. But the thought that Attila died because his nose couldn't take the wedding night is just too silly for the Scourge of Death. The results were just as intense as you would imagine from Attila's group. His followers, heartbroken by his death, held a big funeral with a feast. They put him in a coffin made of gold, silver, and iron, because that's just how he rolls. Then, they killed the people who buried him to keep the place hidden. These people clearly had a lot of trust issues. Alright, let me tell you a little something about Emperor Qin Shi Huang. Dude basically invented being extra. Born in 259 BCE as Ying Zheng, this guy was leading kingdoms while many of us were just trying to get through math class. When he turned 13, he became the king of Qin, one of several fighting states in China. Back then, China was, well, really chaotic. Just a lot of kingdoms battling to see who would be the hero. He spent many years winning over other states, defeating them one by one. It was not pretty, but by 221 BCE, for the first time ever, all of China came together under one person. Him, of course. People say he got rid of all his brothers and sisters just to keep his crown safe. And if his paranoia wasn't dramatic enough, evidence from the terracotta army pits, like a head with an arrow chilling in the back, seemed to support the theory. Forget sharing toys, this man wasn't even sharing the throne. Once Qin Shi Huang secured control of the empire, he had zero chill. Dude became a full-on control freak. His first act as emperor? Standardize everything. Money, weights, measurements, and cartwheel sizes. Yup, because he believed if everything fits together, I can manage it more easily. He also started construction projects. Big construction projects. You know, like the Great Wall of China big. Which back then was more like a pretty good wall, I guess. He also built roads and canals, making ancient China operate more smoothly. And then there was his grave. Yup, the man built his own grave. Many people are okay with a normal grave and maybe a nice headstone. Not the first emperor of China. He had an entire hidden city built for the express purpose of serving as his final resting place, complete with rivers of mercury, which is a strange choice, traps, because he was a bit paranoid, and the terracotta army, thousands of life-size clay soldiers. Dude was really scared of dying, I guess. He conquered all of China, built the Great Wall, and made a lasting mark in history. But the idea of not being there to enjoy it really scared him. He wanted to live forever. He brought in alchemists, magicians, and just about anyone who claimed that they could help him live forever. They told him, oh, there's this special element that can make you live forever. And it turns out that it was mercury. You know, the really toxic element that will not help you live forever. Back then, folks believed it was something magical. And since Qin Shi Huang's mom didn't raise a coward, he went full commit. He began popping mercury pills like candy, believing he had found the secret to living forever. And in 210 BCE, during one of his journeys, Qin Shi Huang's quest for immortality went wrong in a major way. The mercury pills he took to stay alive forever ended up causing his death. But wait, it gets even better. His helpers, worried that people would find out he had passed away, put his body in a carriage full of smelly fish to cover up the smell. Yep, the first emperor of China, the man who wanted everything to be perfect, spent his very first days of the afterlife relaxing next to a pile of dead fish. Very sad. Also, hey, subscribe. Just do it. Just subscribe. Okay, thank you. Well, that brings us to our next guy, Alexander the Great. He wasn't just any king, he was the king. The one who believed that ruling one empire wasn't enough, and chose to conquer the known world while many of us were still trying to understand taxes. And even though his life was full of amazing military successes and famous victories, his death was a complete letdown. He didn't pass away in a brave battle or a big fight to the end. Nope, Alexander the Great died from typhoid, or malaria, or maybe just excessive partying. He was born in 356 BC in Macedonia. His dad, King Philip II, was really smart when it came to the military. But Alexander wanted more than to just take over the throne. He wanted it all. Alexander received top notch education, all thanks to his private tutor, Aristotle. Yeah, that Aristotle. When he turned 20, his dad was no longer around, because he went to the store to get some cigarettes. Nah, he was assassinated, and Alexander became king. Jumping ahead to 323 BCE, Alexander was in Babylon, just back from another successful mission. He was only 32 years old, but had already accomplished more than what many people could in 10 lifetimes. He could have celebrated his win, but instead, he chose to do what he always did: keep the fun alive. One night, after a really fun party, as expected, Alexander began to feel kinda sick. At the beginning, people probably just tried to ignore it. He'd faced tougher times, many fights, wounds, tiring walks through the desert. What's a small fever next to that? But this time, the sickness got the best of him. In about 10 days, Alexander got worse. He was in pain, couldn't move, and slowly lost his ability to talk. His generals, likely worried about seeing their strong leader turn into a helpless sick dude, kept asking him who should lead the empire next. And Alexander, responding in maybe the funniest way he could, said, "To the strongest." Great, great, very useful. That won't cause any problems down the line. So, what brought down the guy who could beat armies and handle wild horses? People who study history still debate it. The main ideas are typhoid fever or malaria, both usual and dangerous in ancient Babylon. Some stories say Alexander made himself weak by drinking a lot and pushing himself too hard, and when he got sick, his body just couldn't take it anymore. Next, there's the more interesting idea: poisoning. Maybe one of his generals or opponents put something in his drink. It's a nice story, but there's a problem with it. Poison back then didn't work very quickly. The slow decline that Alexander went through doesn't really suggest assassination. It shouts way too much wine, not enough taking care of himself. According to a cheery new theory, the man wasn't quite dead when everyone started planning his huge farewell tour. He could have just been lying there, fully awake but unable to move, which is somewhat horrifying. No matter what really took place, Alexander the Great, this amazing person, passed away in a bed in Babylon at only 32 years old. Didn't even reach middle age. Unfortunate. But hey, what a life. Next up is the real OG, my man Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, who was named Temujin, I butchered that pronunciation, when he was born in 1162, didn't have a lot of help or special benefits when he began his life. Nope, his first 30 years, a bunch of big mistakes, being let down, and feeling left out by his family. Instead of feeling sorry for himself or sharing sad memes and whining on Twitter, Genghis Khan just said, "Hey, what if I conquer everything and make history?" So that's what he did. By the time he was done, he'd built the biggest connected empire ever. The biggest empire reaching from the Great Wall of China to the Caspian Sea and further. This guy went from living in a tent with his family to owning all of China, Central Asia, and pretty much everywhere else. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Genghis Khan, the man who spent many years fighting, also met his end in a surprisingly dull way. Imagine this: Genghis Khan is out there, doing his thing, taking over, planning, probably giving pep talks to his army like, "You want to win?" And then, bang. This guy, who's been through tough times, betrayals, and maybe even dealt with some not so great Yelp reviews, falls off his horse. Not just a simple fall, but a serious injury that, according to some stories, left him in bad shape. The next part is a bit unclear. Some people think he was killed, because why not make the story more interesting? But we aren't too sure. I mean, it's Genghis Khan. Naturally, some folks say he might have been taken down by a mysterious assassin. It would make for an epic story. Others, they just blame the infection. Also, nobody knows where his grave is, but the rumors are really weird. Like, some people say it's on Burkhan Khaldun, where he once hid himself from enemies. Or maybe it's hidden under a forest, covered by trees and horses. Then there's the idea that his grave got the rough treatment, with 1,000 horses walking all over it. Yeah, we aren't too sure. The guy who made history ended up going out because he bonked his head on the ground, falling off his pony. Pretty cool, I guess. Anyway, moving on. Napoleon Bonaparte, whatever. The short, angry French dude. He just kept taking over Europe until, of course, Europe finally said they had enough of him. Born in 1769, this man quickly became famous and became the Emperor of France. And yet, he's another addition to our list of people who died in somewhat boring ways. He began with simple roots. He was a smart military leader and eventually became the Emperor of France. Sure, there were some bumps along the way, like losing badly at the Battle of Waterloo, but who hasn't had a tough day at work? Having one setback in a career filled with wins doesn't really destroy your whole reputation. Unless you're Napoleon. Then it did. After Waterloo, he ended up on a free trip to the island of St. Helena, a lonely rock in the South Atlantic. The man who once had power over much of Europe was now spending his days in exile, with only his thoughts, a few island goats, and the rare visitor to keep him company. That's a midlife crisis. But did he handle this exile well? Nope. He was slowly getting sick, and not in an exciting way. This wasn't the end of a great nation, it was just a Frenchman having some tummy troubles. Super fancy. He did in fact lose his battle with what was probably stomach cancer. He passed away on May 5th, 1821. No sudden escapes, no hidden tricks to make things better, just a gradual slide into sickness and passing away. But hold on, the story isn't finished yet. Since Napoleon was such a dramatic figure, he couldn't pass away without sparking some conspiracy theories. Some folks really wanted to think that Napoleon didn't pass away from stomach cancer like the doctors claimed. They believed he was poisoned with arsenic. Well, stomach cancer just doesn't sound exciting enough for someone as legendary as Napoleon. People said that the British government, still upset about Napoleon's rule, might have played a part in his downfall by secretly poisoning him. Reports say that traces of arsenic were found in his hair, and conspiracy theories quickly began to gather, spinning new stories that made Napoleon's death a dramatic murder rather than just a natural result of a rather unhealthy life. Like, maybe the guy just had too many croissants. There's a fun little theory that says that he was buried in the Invalides in 1840. The British Empire played a trick by switching his body with that of an ordinary person. And the reason was to throw shade at France, obviously. Nothing says respectful diplomatic relations quite like swapping out a legendary emperor for an ordinary person. Picture the French showing their respect to him for all this time, only to discover they've been honoring a guy named Jacques from the neighborhood bakery. Now let's talk about another guy. Cyrus the Great. You know, the big one. The dude who said, I'm gonna take over all of Persia. And then a bit more, just for fun. Cyrus, born in 600 BCE, was like the ancient world's superachiever who was really dedicated to his job. He didn't just lounge in fancy places drinking wine. Nah, he was out taking over lands, building empires, and likely making many people regret ever hearing the name Cyrus. After taking over one kingdom after another, he built the first Persian Empire. Cyrus ruled over a huge area of about 5.5 million square kilometers, which was the biggest empire during his time. He started by taking down the Median Empire, bringing the Medes and the Persians together. He then beat the Lydian king Croesus, spreading his rule over Anatolia, and took Babylon in 539 BCE, adding Mesopotamia, Syria, and parts of the Levant. Cyrus also moved east into Central Asia. His empire reached from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River. But here's the thing about someone who tries really hard. Eventually, you meet someone who doesn't care about being beaten. Meet the Massagetae and their queen, Tomyris. Cyrus faced someone tough here, and wow, it did not turn out great. Cyrus was just going about his business, conquering and ruling, the usual for him, when he chose to challenge the Massagetae. What does this lead to? Oh, nothing big, just his death. Queen Tomyris, the leader of the Massagetae, wasn't very pleased with his plans to grow his empire. Cyrus, the determined guy he was, thought he could simply defeat her army and continue enjoying his life. But Queen Tomyris, she had different ideas. She wasn't going to let him take over her people and just leave happily. She gathered all her troops, and in a surprising turn of events, she was able to defeat Cyrus's forces. Now Cyrus, who was previously thinking this is surely going to be a win, had to pull back. And what happens when Cyrus retreats? He dies. But not in the grand heroic way. Nope, he dies in a way that feels like, we're losing, and now he's dead. It's a bit awkward, honestly. There's more. You didn't believe Cyrus would just pass away and that'd be it, did you? Nope, Queen Tomyris still had more in store for him. After he lost, she made sure his death wasn't just a loss, it was a big show. She ordered that his body be mutilated. Tomyris had his head chopped off, put in a wineskin, and filled it with blood. Specifically, the blood of her son. It might be a bit over the top, but it's all in the past. People liked being extra back then. Cyrus, this amazing conqueror of empires, The guy who believed nothing could hold him back, he ended up being killed by a wandering tribe and had his head turned into a bloody, strange keepsake. 'Cause that's history for you. Next up, we got Vladimir the Impaler. Born in 1431, this guy wasn't really famous for being charming or diplomatic. Nope, Vlad was the type of leader who liked to be direct. His message was clear. Anyone who went against him should start praying. Vlad was a prince of Wallachia, and although his habit of impaling people made him very scary, it also gave him a reputation as one of the most feared and well-known rulers ever. His love for punishment was so strong that even the Ottoman Empire reached out to him saying, "Hey, maybe ease up on the impaling." After many tough fights, broken promises, and a time that scared even the strongest men, Vlad's fortune came to an end. Vlad the Impaler's death is surrounded by mystery and different stories, making it one of history's more talked about subjects. Most sources say that Vlad died in battle in December 1476 or January 1477, but the details are not clear. There are two main ideas. One points to Ottoman forces, and the other hints at betrayal by his own men. So, one idea suggests that Vlad was killed in a fight with Ottoman forces close to Bucharest. Back then, Wallachia was a troubled area, stuck between the goals of the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. Vlad had recently gotten back to the Wallachian throne with help from Hungary, but the situation was shaky. The Ottomans, wanting to take back control of the area, launched a campaign to get rid of him. Vlad's army, much smaller in size, probably encountered Ottoman soldiers in a direct fight. The more interesting and sad idea is that Vlad was turned against and killed by his own people. Vlad's leadership was marked by his harsh actions to keep control and create fear. His use of sharp stakes and other harsh punishments made everyone feel scared and suspicious. In a situation like this, even his friends might have seen him as a risk. Some stories say that in a wild fight or surprise attack, Vlad was taken down by his own soldiers, either because of personal issues, money from Ottoman agents, or fear of his erratic leadership. And also, what happened to Vlad's body adds to the mystery. Some sources say that his head was sent to the Ottoman Sultan to show he was dead, while others say his body was burned in a monastery. But nobody's been able to prove anything. The uncertainty about his death has sparked stories and myths, portraying him both as a sad hero and a cruel ruler brought down by the harshness that marked his rule. Next up, we got a conqueror. We got a William the Conqueror. William was born in 1028. He didn't just take over England, he made sure everyone heard about it. In fact, the way he's known as the Conqueror really shows how over the top he was. His story is amazing. Battles, takeovers, and a whole kingdom under his control. But just like all great leaders, William had one weakness: falling off of horses. Yep, poor guy fell off his pony. There's a wild theory that says Philip really disliked Richard because he left Philip's sister in an insulting way, and then had the nerve to become King of England. So what went down? In 1087, during the Siege of Mantes, William, known for being a strong conqueror, fell off his horse. And no, it wasn't a big fight move or even a strike. He just fell off his horse right in the middle of everything happening. The great William, the man who took over a whole country, made kingdom surrender and changed a whole society, died because he couldn't stay on his horse. So what happened after that? A string of really bad things. The fall led to some bad internal injuries. You might assume that someone who survived many years of fighting would be okay, but this was a different kind of injury. It got infected, as expected. And since it's the 11th century, there wasn't really a simple solution for that. Now, William didn't really slip away quietly. He was in pain for weeks, and it said that during this time he became a bit grumpy. Seriously, like, who wouldn't be? And after a few weeks of pain, William gave in to his injuries. To make things worse, William was buried in a grave that wasn't even respectful. They said his body didn't even fit the tomb right, which is quite a way to end a reign. Next up, Richard the Lionheart. Born in 1157, this person had a resume that would make anyone who tries hard feel shy. He wasn't just the King of England. He also traveled a lot through Europe and the Middle East, fighting in battles, taking back holy lands, and building his reputation as one of the coolest kings ever. He was really scary in fights. If Twitter had been around in medieval times, every tweet would have been about Richard doing something really brave, like rushing into a battle or leading his soldiers himself. But as usual, destiny had different ideas. Even the greatest warriors can't avoid the one thing that medieval life often dealt out: an unexpected, somewhat awkward death. So there he was, in 1199, doing what he loved most, attacking a castle. The castle we're talking about is Chalus-Chabrol in France, and Richard was there to get some treasure, since being a king doesn't seem to pay well enough. Now, if you're picturing a grand movie-like battle, don't. This felt more like a small argument over shiny objects than the grand adventure of a king. So the battle started. While looking at the castle walls, Richard made the smart choice to walk around without his armor on. After so many years of fighting, he thought he was unbeatable. Heads up, he wasn't. A crossbow shooter, probably a pretty irritated Frenchman, fired a shot, striking Richard in the shoulder. Now, here's the surprising part. The bolt wasn't even shot by a skilled knight or soldier. Nope, it came from a random castle guard who probably couldn't believe his luck. And you also might assume that this small injury wouldn't matter much to someone like Richard, who'd been through many fights and adventures. But oh no, back in medieval times, medicine had a different view. The cut got infected, and naturally, gangrene began to form. This is the part where Richard's story gets unexpectedly nice. Despite being on his deathbed, the Lionheart seemed to have a moment of clarity. He forgave the person who shot him. The King of England, a guy who once led troops far and wide, chose to move on from the past. Some people believe this kind act was Richard's way of finding peace with his past. Others think he was just confused from the illness. In any case, it was unexpectedly nice. But don't worry about the crossbowman. The man was put to death anyway. Because in medieval times, forgiveness was more about showing you were a truly good person just before your death. Anyway, if you made it to the end, subscribe and click this video here that YouTube thinks you'll like.